Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Historian, a quiet corner where the past drifts in softly and forgotten worlds return as gentle stories for the night. Tonight, we'll be wandering into a world where whispers carry more weight than words, where danger rarely announces itself, and where what we might call conspiracy is not always a wild idea, but sometimes a quiet reflection of how life truly worked. We'll move slowly through the streets of ancient Rome and the shadowed villages of Tudor England, noting how power, fear, and belief shaped the way people lived, ate, trusted, and sometimes quietly doubted everything around them. But before you settle in, if you truly enjoy these calm journeys through history, you're welcome to like this video and subscribe only if it feels right for you. And when you're ready, you might leave a comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. There's something comforting in knowing how many quiet corners of the world are listening together. Now, dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum gently in the background, and let's step into the past. Slowly, softly, together. You find yourself standing at the edge of a Roman street, just as the day begins to settle into its slower rhythm. The stone beneath your feet still holds a trace of warmth, like a memory of the sun that hasn't quite faded. Around you, voices drift in and out, not loud, not urgent, but constant. No one is shouting, no one seems alarmed, and yet, there is a certain carefulness in the way people speak. Words are chosen, then softened, then sometimes left unfinished. You begin to notice that conversations rarely move in straight lines. They circle gently, like hands tracing the rim of a cup. A name might be mentioned, then quickly replaced with someone or they. A question might be asked, but answered with a shrug or a glance or a quiet change of subject. It isn't that people don't know things. In fact, it feels like they know quite a lot. But what they know seems to exist in fragments, small pieces that never quite come together in one place. At a nearby stall, a merchant leans closer to a customer, lowering his voice just enough that you cannot quite hear the words. You catch only a few scattered sounds, a name that feels familiar, and a soft exhale at the end. The kind people make when they are not surprised, but still unsettled. You begin to understand something subtle, and information here does not travel as a clear message. It moves more like a faint breeze, touching one person, then another, never fully visible, but always present. And like a breeze, it changes direction. What begins as a simple remark becomes, over time, something heaviest. Not quite a fact, not quite a story, but something in between. A small detail reaches you. Someone important has not been seen in a few days. There is no official explanation, only quiet guesses. An illness, perhaps, or something less easily named. No one says the word danger. No one needs to. You take a few steps forward, and the street opens into a wider space, a gathering of people moving in gentle patterns. A group of men stand together, their heads inclined just slightly toward one another. One of them pauses mid-sentence, all glancing over his shoulder before continuing more softly. That glance tells you more than the words ever could. There is a shared understanding here, one that does not need to be spoken directly. People listen not just to what is said, but to what is avoided. They notice pauses, shifts in tone, the small hesitation before a name is spoken, and slowly, almost without realizing it, you begin to do the same. You start to listen differently. You notice how certain names seem to carry weight, as if they must be handled carefully. You notice how some topics dissolve the moment they begin, like mist fading in early light. And you begin to feel that beneath the ordinary rhythm of daily life, something quieter is always moving, something watchful. A young servant passes by, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. His steps are quick, but not hurried. His eyes remain lowered, though not entirely. Every so often he glances upward, not to meet anyone's gaze, but to observe, just briefly before looking away again. For a moment, you follow his path with your eyes. He disappears into a narrow doorway, and the street continues as it was. But something about those small moments lingers, because it reflects a pattern you are only just beginning to see. People here are not simply living their lives, they are navigating them, carefully, quietly, with an awareness that something unseen may always be just nearby. And yet, this doesn't feel like panic. It feels practiced, like something learned over time. You begin to wonder how long it has been this way. How many conversations have unfolded in this same careful tone? How many truths have existed only in pieces, scattered across different voices, never fully gathered in one place? A faint sound reaches you, laughter, soft and brief. It comes from a group seated near the edge of the square. The laughter feels real, but it fades quickly, replaced by a quieter murmur. Even joy here seems to carry a certain restraint, as if it knows when to step back. You shift your attention again, and now the entire scene feels slightly different. What once seemed like an ordinary street now feels layered. Beneath every interaction, there is something unspoken, not necessarily hidden, but not fully revealed either. It is not that people are being deceived, it is that they are living with a kind of partial knowing, enough to sense when something is wrong, not enough to say it openly. And in that space, between knowing and not knowing, something begins to take shape. Not a clear idea, not yet, but a feeling. A quiet awareness that events may not always unfold as they appear, that outcomes may have beginnings no one ever sees, and that sometimes what seems like coincidence carries a weight that feels intentional. You don't yet call it anything. There is no need to give it a name. For now, it is simply part of the air you breathe. And as you stand there, listening to voices that never quite say everything they mean, you begin to wonder, what happens when these whispers are not just passing thoughts, but the only way people understand the world around them? You remain where you are for a while, letting the rhythm of the street settle into something almost familiar. The murmurs, the half-finished sentences, the careful glances, they no longer feel unusual. Instead, they begin to feel like a kind of language, not one made of clear words, but of tone, pause, and presence. And then, slowly, something changes. Not in a dramatic way. There is no sudden noise, no sharp interruption, but the air feels slightly heavier. Conversations do not stop, but they soften even more, as if pressed gently downward. A name moves through the crowd, almost imperceptibly. You do not hear it clearly at first, only the shape of it, carried in fragments, a syllable here, another there. And yet, even before you fully understand it, you feel its weight. It is the name of Julius Caesar. You notice how people react, not openly, not with visible alarm, but with something quieter. A brief pause before speaking again. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a shift in posture, almost too subtle to describe. It is not afraid exactly, not the kind that makes people run or shout. It is something more familiar, something expected. You begin to gather small pieces of what is being said, not from a single conversation, but from many. Each one offers only a fragment, but together they begin to form a shape. There have been signs, nothing certain, nothing that could be pointed out directly, but enough to create a feeling, the kind that settles gently at the back of the mind and refuses to leave. Someone mentioned a warning spoken days ago. Another recalls a dream, although the details are unclear. A third shrugs, saying only that, "These things happen," and that phrase lingers. These things happen. It is not said with surprise. It is said with recognition, and as though the idea of danger, even at the highest level, is not unusual at all. You begin to understand that in this world, warnings do not always arrive as clear messages. They come as impressions, as moments that feel slightly out of place, a conversation that ends too quickly, a look that lasts a little too long. Individually, each of these means very little, but together, they begin to suggest something. A man standing nearby adjusts the folds of his robe, his movements precise but slightly tense. He is speaking with another, although their voices are so low that the words dissolve before reaching you. What remains is the rhythm, a quiet urgency, contained but present. At one point, he stops speaking entirely, his gaze drifting past his companion for just a second. You follow that gaze, but there is nothing obvious to see. Only people, moving like they always have. And yet, that moment of sadness feels significant, like a question that no one is willing to ask aloud. You take a slow breath, and it becomes clear that what is unfolding here is not confusion. It is not ignorance, it is something closer to acceptance. People feel that something may happen, perhaps even something serious, but they do not react with shock or disbelief. Instead, they continued. They speak, they walk, they trade, they wait. Life moves forward, even when the ground beneath it feels slightly uncertain. You begin to wonder why. Why, if there are warnings, do they not lead to action? Why, if danger is sensed, does it not change the course of events? The answer does not arrive as a statement. It emerges slowly, through observation. Because acting on uncertainty is its own kind of risk. To speak too openly is to draw attention. To accuse without proof is to invite suspicion. To move too quickly is to reveal what you know, and perhaps what you fear. And so, people remain still. Not because they are unaware, but because they are careful. A soft ripple of movement passes through the crowd as a small group of officials walks by. Their expressions are composed, almost calm, but there is a certain tightness around their eyes. They do not look at anyone directly, and no one calls out to them. It is a quiet choreography, one that everyone seems to understand. You notice again the young servant from earlier, now standing near the edge of the square. He holds nothing in his hands this time. His posture is relaxed, but his attention is sharp. He watches people as they pass, not staring, but observing in brief, precise moments. At one point, his gaze lingers on a pair of men speaking in hushed tones. He does not approach them. He does not react. He simply notices and then looks away. It is a small action, but it reflects something larger. In this world, awareness is not about reacting. It is about seeing and choosing when not to act. The sky above you begins to shift in color, the light softening as the day moves forward. Shadows lengthen across the stone, stretching quietly without drawing attention to themselves. It reminds you of the feeling that has been growing since you arrived, not a sudden realization, not a clear conclusion, but a slow understanding that builds over time, that here, danger does not always interrupt life. It moves alongside it. It can be sensed, even anticipated, and still, it continues. You think again of the fragments you heard. The warnings, the glances, the unfinished sentences. None of them were loud. None of them demanded attention. And yet, together, they form something difficult to ignore. A pattern, not one that is fully visible, not one that can be easily explained, but one that feels real. You begin to wonder if this is how events truly unfold in this world. Not through sudden surprises, but through quiet accumulations. Small signs, noticed but not confirmed. Feelings, shared but not spoken. Warnings, heard but not followed. And, if that is the case, then perhaps what people later call a conspiracy does not begin as a secret plan. Perhaps it begins as something much softer, a sense, a concern, a quiet awareness that something is already in motion, long before anyone dares to name it. Oh. You remain within the gentle movement of the crowd, but something inside your awareness has shifted. The fragments you noticed before no longer feel isolated. They begin to connect, not into a clear picture, but into something more subtle, a shared understanding that seems to exist between people, even when no words are exchanged. It is not announced, it is not written anywhere, and yet it is there, a sense that something is happening, and that many people, in their own quiet way, already know. You begin to notice how often conversations pause just before reaching something important. A sentence begins with confidence, then softens, then drifts away. Not because the speaker has forgotten what they were meant to say, but because they have chosen not to finish it. At first it feels like hesitation. But as you listen more closely, it becomes clear that it is something else. A kind of discipline, a careful shaping of words, not to express everything, but to avoid saying too much. Nearby, two men stand beside a column, their shoulders angled slightly inward. Their voices are low, almost blending into the ambient hum of the street. You cannot hear the details, but you notice the pattern. One speaks briefly, the other nods, then both fall silent for a moment before continuing. That silence is not empty. It carries meaning. It allows certain things to remain understood without being spoken aloud. You begin to realize that in this world, silence is not the absence of communication. It is part of it. A woman passes by, her expression calm, her steps steady. As she moves through the space, and her eyes flick briefly toward a group gathered in the distance. The glance lasts no more than a second, but it is precise, intentional. Then she looks forward again, as if nothing has happened. You follow her gaze, but again, there is nothing obvious to see. Only rooms. And yet, Something about that moment feels connected to everything else you have observed. It is as though information here does not move in straight lines. It moves in small gestures, in shared looks, in what is deliberately left unsaid. And gradually, a thought begins to form. If so many people seem to feel the same thing, if the same name, the same feeling, the same quiet tension appears again and again, then perhaps this is not uncertain at all. Perhaps it is something closer to certainty, but a kind of certainty that cannot be spoken. Because to speak it would be to step into danger. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles gently. There are moments when truth does not need to be hidden. It only needs to remain unspoken. A group of older men sit together on a low bench, their posture relaxed, their conversation light. They speak of ordinary things, trade, weather, small inconveniences. And yet, every so often, a word appears that does not quite belong, a name perhaps, or a reference to something recent. When that happens, the tone shifts almost imperceptibly, a pause, a glance, then the conversation returns to safer ground. It is like watching someone step close to the edge of something, only to turn away at the last moment, not out of fear alone, but out of understanding, because everyone knows where that edge leads. You begin to feel that this pattern is not new. It is practiced, learned over time, passed quietly from one person to another, not through instruction, but through observation. People here have learned how to live with knowledge that cannot be openly shared. And more than that, they have learned how to live with each other while carrying that knowledge. The young servant appears again, this time seated near a shaded wall. He is still, his hands resting loosely in his lap. From a distance, he seems almost at ease. But as you watch more closely, you notice how his attention shifts, not constantly, but exactly. He listens without appearing to listen. He watches without appearing to watch. At one point, a man approaches him briefly, leaning down to say something. The servants nod once, quietly. No surprises, no reaction. The man leaves. And the servant remains as he was. But something has changed. You cannot say exactly what. Only that another piece has been added, somewhere in the quiet network of awareness that surrounds you. It becomes clear that knowledge here does not belong to individuals. It is shared, but unevenly. Distributed in fragments, carried by many, but fully held by no one. And perhaps that is what allows it to exist at all. Because if no single person holds the whole truth, then no single person can be held responsible for it. A soft breeze moves through the space, stirring the edges of garments, lifting small traces of dust into the air. It passes gently, touching everything without settling anywhere for long. The feeling is familiar now, because it mirrors the way information moves here, light, subtle, always present. You begin to understand that this is how something larger takes shape. Not through a single plan, clearly defined, not through a loud declaration, but through accumulation, through small pieces that align just enough to create a pattern, and through a shared decision, not spoken, but understood, to let that pattern remain in the background, because bringing it forward will change everything, and perhaps not for the better. You look around once more, and the scene feels both ordinary and quietly charged. People continue their routines. They walk, they speak, they trade, they rest. Nothing appears out of place, and yet, beneath it all, there is a present, a quiet agreement, an understanding that some things are known, and will remain that way. Not because they are hidden, but because they are too real to be spoken safely. And as that thought settles, another follows, just as gently. If silence can hold so much, then what happens eventually, when it breaks? You remain in that same space of careful awareness, where silence carries meaning and small gestures feel deliberate. And gradually, your attention begins to shift, not just toward the people around you, but toward something larger, the structure that holds all of this together. Because behind the whispers, behind the shared glances and softened voices, there is something else quietly present. Power, not loud power, not the kind that announces itself with force, but something steadier, more controlled. You begin to notice it in small details, in the way certain names are spoken with a hint of respect, even when nothing else changes in the speaker's tone. In the way certain paths clear just slightly as someone passes, not drastic, but enough to be felt. And slowly, one name begins to emerge more clearly than the others. Augustus. It is not spoken often, and when it is handled with care, not out of fear alone, but out of habit. As though people have learned over time that this name belongs to something larger than any single person. You begin to understand that what you are witnessing is not just a moment in time. It is the result of something that has already taken place, quietly, gradually. A shift. There was once a system here, you feel, where power was shared more openly, where decisions moved through councils, through voices that balanced one another. And now, something has changed, not all at once, not in a way that could be clearly marked, but piece by piece. Like a structure being reshaped from within, while still appearing the same from the outside. You notice how titles are used, words that sound modest, almost restrained, nothing that declares openly absolute control. And yet, those same titles seem to carry a quiet weight, one that influences everything around them. It is a careful balance, to hold power without appearing to take too much of it, to guide without outcomes drawing attention to the act of guiding. You begin to see that this is not accidental. It is intentional, and it requires constant attention. Because power, in this form, is not something that simply exists. It must be maintained. A man passes by, dressed with a level of refinement that sets him slightly apart from the others. His expression is calm, but there is a certain alertness beneath it, a readiness to adjust, to respond, to remain aware of how he is being seen. It reminds you that power is not only about control over others, it is also about control over perception, how things appear, how they are understood, what people believe is happening, and what they are allowed to see. You begin to feel that much of what feels stable here is, in fact, carefully arranged, not false, not necessarily, but like a surface smoothed over something more complex beneath. A group of officials gathers nearby, their conversation measured, their gestures contained. They speak in calm tones, but there is a precision to their interaction, as though each word has been considered before it is spoken. Nothing is left to chance. And yet, at the same time, everything must appear natural. That is the quiet challenge of this kind of power. That's to shape reality, while allowing it to feel unshaped. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles gently. This is not a system that has been overturned. It is a system that has been adjusted. Sizes. Be careful. In ways that do not invite resistance, because they are not always visible enough to resist. The young servant moves again through the edge of your vision, carrying a small tray this time. His steps are steady. His expression is neutral. He approaches a doorway where two men stand waiting. One of them accepts the tray without speaking. The exchange is smooth, practiced. No attention is drawn to it. And yet, even in this small moment, you feel the larger structure at work. Roles are understood. Movements are expected. Everything fits into place. The servant does not question. The men do not explain. And still, as something important has just passed between them, you begin to understand that power does not only exist in grand decisions or public acts. It exists in these quiet exchanges, in who serves and who is served, in who speaks and who listens, in who is seen, and who remains in the background. The light shifts again, softening further as the day continues. Shadows stretch gently along the stone, creating shapes that change slowly, almost unnoticed. It reminds you of the transformation you are beginning to see, not sharp, not sudden, but steady. And perhaps that is why it is so effective, because when change happens slowly enough, it does not feel like change at all. It feels like the way things have always been. You begin to wonder how many people fully understand what has happened, how many can see the shape of it clearly, or rather than just sensing its effects. And then another thought followed, just as quietly. Perhaps clarity is not required. Perhaps it is enough that people adapt, that they learn over time how to move within the structure as it exists, to speak carefully, to observe closely, to accept what cannot be openly challenged. In that way, power does not need to force obedience. It becomes something softer, something that is lived rather than imposed. And as you stand there, watching a world that appears calm but feels carefully held together, you begin to feel something deeper still. If power must be maintained so carefully, if it depends not only on strength, but on perception, silence, and quiet agreement, then perhaps it is not as unshakable as it appears. Perhaps beneath its smooth surface there is always a possibility, small, distant, but real, that something could shift again. You remain within this carefully balanced world, where power is not heard but sustained, and where even stability feels gently arranged. And as you continue to observe, another pattern begins to emerge. It does not arrive with drama. It does not announce its soul. It explains its. At first, it was just a small detail. A name you heard earlier, mentioned in passing, now no longer appears. Conversations that once circled around a particular figure now move easily in other directions, as if adjusting without effort. No one asks where that person has gone, or perhaps, more quietly, no one asks out loud. You begin to understand that in this world, people do not always suddenly disappear. They fade. As a presence becomes less frequent, a voice is heard less often. An invitation is not extended, a seat remains empty, and then, after some time, no one expects it to be filled again. It is a slow erasure, one that leaves very little to point to. And that is what makes it effective, because what cannot be clearly seen cannot be easily questioned. You notice a group of men speaking near the edge of a courtyard. Their conversation is light, almost casual, but there is a certain carefulness beneath it. One of them begins to mention someone, a name that seems familiar, but stops halfway through, replacing it with a vague gesture of the hand. The others nod, not asking for clarification. They already understand. There is no need to say more. You feel the weight of that moment, because it reveals something subtle but important. Knowledge here does not always lead to discussion. Sometimes, it leads to silence, and silence in this case is not emptiness, it is agreement, a shared decision to leave certain things untouched. You begin to feel that this is how rivals are removed, not always through public acts, not through loud confrontations, but through processes that leave little trace. An accusation that is never fully explained, an illness that arrives without warning, a departure that is framed as voluntary. Each one, on its own, could be anything. But together, they form a pattern that feels deliberate. A man walks past you, his expression composed, his pace unhurried. There is nothing unusual about him at first glance, but then you notice the way others responded, or rather, the way they did not respond. No one greets him, no one acknowledges his presence. It is not hostile, it is something quieter, distance. As if an invisible line has been drawn around him, one that others are careful not to cross. He continues walking, his posture unchanged. If he notices the shift, he does not show it, and yet you feel that something has already begun. Not an end exactly, but the beginning of one. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles gently. In a world where visibility brings influence, to be known is to be seen. To be seen is to be measured, and to be measured. You begin to understand that power does not only remove those who act against it, it also removes those who might, quietly, before anything becomes certain, before anything must be proven. This is not chaos, it is not random, it is careful, almost precise, like a sculptor removing small pieces of stone, not to destroy the shape, but to refine it. The metaphor feels fitting. Yes, because nothing here appears broken, the structure remains intact, life continues, and yet pieces are being taken away, one by one. A familiar face no longer appears at gatherings. A voice is no longer heard in discussion. A name becomes less frequent, then rare, then absent, and failing, forgotten, or at least no longer spoken. The young servant reappears once more, this time standing near a doorway, watching as people pass. His posture is still, but his attention is active, moving gently from one figure to another. At one point, a man approaches him and speaks briefly. The servant listens, nods, and then steps aside, allowing the man to enter. It is a simple exchange, but something in it feels final. You notice the man as he disappears inside. There is nothing remarkable about him, no sign of urgency, no visible tension. And yet, for reasons you cannot fully explain, you feel that this may be the last time he passes through that doorway in this way. Not because of anything you have seen, but because of everything you have begun to understand. In this world, endings do not always announce themselves. They arrive quietly. They pass through ordinary moments, unnoticed by most, understood only by those who are paying close attention. The air feels still again. The earlier movement settled into a calm that almost seems undisturbed. But now, you know better. Calm here is not the absence of change. It is the surface above it. And beneath that surface, decisions are being made. Paths are being shaped, lives are being redirected, or gently removed from the pattern altogether. You begin to wonder how many of these changes have already taken place. How many names have passed through this quiet process, leaving behind only faint traces in memory. And more quietly still, another thought begins to form. If removal can happen so smoothly, if a person can fade without resistance, without explanation, then what does it mean to remain? The world around you has already taught you to listen carefully, to notice what is not said, to understand how absence can carry meaning. And now, as your awareness deepens, another layer begins to reveal itself. It is not something you can see, not something you can hear clearly or point to with certainty. And yet, it is there, woven gently into the fabric of everyday life. The possibility of poison. It does not arrive with spectacle. There is no dramatic moment, no visible sign that marks its presence. Instead, it exists quietly, like a question that never fully leaves the room. You begin to notice how often food is handled with care, not in a way that draws attention, but in small, deliberate movements. A cup is set down and then lifted again, as if reconsidered. A dish is presented, but not immediately touched. Nothing appears unusual, and yet everything feels slightly measured. You watch as a meal is prepared within a shaded courtyard. The process is calm, almost graceful. Ingredients are arranged, hands move steadily, voices remain low. There is no sign of urgency, but there is attention. Every step seems to matter. A tray is assembled and carried forward, not hurriedly, but with a certain quiet precision. It passes through more than one set of hands, each transfer smooth, practiced. And then, just before it reaches its final destination, it pauses. A figure steps forward, not dressed with distinction, not marked by status, and yet positioned with quiet importance. The food taster. You watch as he approaches the tray. There is no ceremony, no announcement. The moment is almost invisible to those not looking directly at it. He chooses a portion, not large, not small, enough. He eats slowly, not because he is savoring the taste, but because the act itself requires time. His movements are steady, his expression unchanged. Around him, others continue as they were, though you sense their attention shifting slightly, just enough to notice. Nothing happened, at least not immediately. And that is the quiet uncertainty that lingers. Because poison does not always act at once. It may take time. It may move slowly, almost gently, through the body. It may leave no clear sign until much later, when its presence can no longer be easily traced. You begin to understand why this method is so often chosen. It leaves behind very little. No clear moment of attack. No visible struggle. No simple explanation. Only a gradual change, one that can be mistaken for something else. Illness, fatigue, chance. The food taster steps back after a few moments. His role, for now, is complete. The tray continues forward, carried into the inner space where it will be served. And yet, even as the meal begins, the question does not disappear. It remains, quietly. Because what has just taken place does not remove the possibility of danger. It only shifts it slightly. You begin to see something unsettling beneath this ritual. Safety here is not something that can be guaranteed. It can only be approached, signature, temporarily. The young servant stands nearby, watching from a distance that allows him to remain unnoticed. His posture is still, but his attention is focused. He observed the taster, the tray, the movement of the food as it passed inward. At one point, his gaze lingers on the taster for just a moment longer than before. Not out of curiosity, but with something closer to quiet understanding. Because in this small act, something larger has been revealed. Risk has not disappeared. It has been transferred. The taster has taken the first step into uncertainty, allowing another to follow with slightly more confidence. But only slightly. Because even after the ritual is completed, even after the meal is served and consumed, the possibility remains. A delay. A hidden element. Something unnoticed. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles gently. In this world, protection does not remove danger. It only moves it, from one person to another, from one moment to the next. And so, the act of eating, something that should be simple, even comforting, becomes layered with quiet awareness. Each bite is taken not only with hunger, but with attention. Each sip carries not only taste, but a question. You notice how conversation during the meal remains light, almost intentional so. Topics stay close to the surface. No one speaks of serious matters. No one raises their voice. It is as if the space itself encourages calm, or, perhaps, requires it. Because to acknowledge the possibility too openly would be to disrupt the fragile sense of control that has been carefully maintained. And so, the ritual continues. Meals are prepared, food is tasted, life moves forward, and beneath it all, the same quiet uncertainty remains. Not overwhelming, not paralyzing, but constant. Like a faint echo that never fully fades. You begin to understand that this is how danger exists here. Not as a sudden interruption, but as a steady presence. Something that does not need to be seen to be felt. Something that shapes behavior, not through fear alone, but through repetition, through habit, through the quiet understanding that certain precautions are always necessary, even when nothing appears to be wrong. The meal comes to an end. The tray is cleared, the space returns to its usual rhythm. Nothing dramatic has occurred, no visible threat has revealed itself. And yet, the question remains. It lingers in the air, soft but persistent. Because even when everything seems safe, there is always the possibility that something has already begun. The meal fades gently into memory, leaving behind not fullness, but a subtle awareness that lingers. A quiet reminder that even the simple acts can carry unseen weight. And as that awareness settles, your attention begins to turn inward. Because danger, once understood as a possibility, does not remain outside for long. It begins to shape the way a person thinks. You notice it first in the smallest details. The way someone pauses before sitting down, as if considering where they are placing themselves. The way eyes move, not quickly, not nervously, but steadily, taking in the room without appearing to do so. It is not fear exactly. It is something quieter, a kind of constant readiness, and gradually, this feeling gathers around a single figure, a presence that does not need to be announced, because it is already understood. Tiberius. He is not here in front of you, not directly visible in the space you occupy. And yet, his way of living, his way of thinking, seems to echo through everything you have begun to notice. A life where nothing can be taken entirely at face value. A life where every gesture may carry more than one meaning. You begin to imagine what it might feel like to move through the world in that way. Not rushing, not reacting, but always observing. Always purchasing. Not because you want to, but because you must. You picture a quiet room, removed from the noise of the street. Light filters in softly, touching only part of the space, leaving the rest in shadow. Within that room, a figure sits, still, composed, but not at ease. His posture is relaxed, but not careless. His gaze is calm, but never unfocused. Even in stillness, there is movement, a subtle awareness that never fully rests. It is said, in accounts preserved by observers like Tacitus, that this emperor grew increasingly withdrawn over time, not simply distant, but cautious. Careful about whom he trusted, careful about what he revealed. Some might call this suspicion, but here, in this world you are beginning to understand, it feels more like adaptation. Because when danger is real, even if it is rarely seen, the mind adjusts. It learns to notice patterns. It learns to remember small inconsistencies. It learns quietly to expect that not everything is as it appears. This is not a sudden transformation. It happens slowly, almost gently. Like the way your eyes adjust to darkness, at first you see very little. But over time, shapes begin to form, outlines become clearer, and what was once hidden becomes part of your awareness. You begin to see that this kind of vigilance is not exhausting in the way one might expect. It becomes normal, a steady background presence, like breathing. You do not think about each breath individually, and yet it continues, moment by moment, shaping your experience without demanding your attention. In the same way, this quiet watchfulness becomes part of how a person moves through the world. You notice how conversations are approached with care, not avoid, but click gently, with space left for adjustment. A statement is rarely absolute. A question is often framed in a way that allows it to be withdrawn if needed. It is a language shaped not only by meaning, but by possibility. The possibility that someone may be listening. The possibility that something may be misunderstood. The possibility that a simple exchange may carry consequences beyond what is intended. You see it again in the movements of those around you. A man enters a room and pauses, just briefly, allowing his eyes to settle before he takes another step. A woman speaks, then adjusts her tone mid-sentence, softening a phrase that might otherwise stand too firmly. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of awareness, of a mind that has learned to move within uncertainty without resisting it. And slowly, another thought begins to take shape. Perhaps what appears from the outside as paranoia is, from the inside, something much quieter, a form of intelligence shaped by experience. Not intelligence in the sense of grand strategy or deep calculation, but something more immediate, more humans. The ability to feel when something feels slightly out of place, to pause, even when others continue, to hold back, even when speaking would be easier. You think again of the emperor, alone in his space of careful observation. What does it mean to live like that? To never fully relax your awareness, to never assume that a moment is entirely safe. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels steady, like living with a quiet weight that never quite lifts, but also never becomes unbearable, because it has always been there. The young servant appears once more, moving along the edge of the space with a calm, practiced rhythm. He carries nothing this time. His hands are free, but his attention is not. As he passes by a group of men in conversation, he does not slow down. And yet, his gaze shifts just slightly, taking in their posture, or their tone, the subtle tension between them. He does not react, he does not interfere, he immediately notices, and then he continues on his way. It is a small moment, easily overlooked, but it reflects something larger. This kind of awareness is not limited to those in power. It moves quietly through everyone, shaping behavior in ways that are almost invisible, not because people are afraid, but because they have learned. And as that realization settles, you begin to feel the full weight of it. Not heavy, not overwhelming, but constant. A world where danger may never fully disappear will slowly teach its people how to live without certainty, and in doing so, it will shape not only what they do, but how they think. The feeling of watchfulness does not leave you. It stays gently present, like a thin layer of awareness resting over everything you see. And as you move forward into another part of the day, you begin to notice how this awareness shapes something deeply ordinary. A meal. At first, it appears no different from before. A table is arranged, dishes are placed with quiet precision. The light falls softly across polished surfaces, catching on the edges of cups and the gentle curve of a bowl. Voices gather, calm and measured, as people take their places. Nothing feels rushed, nothing feels tense, and yet, beneath the stillness, something is already in motion. You remember what you have learned, that safety here is not assumed. It is approximately through habit, through repetition, through small, practiced actions that do not draw attention to themselves. The ritual begins before anyone takes a bite. The food taster steps forward once more. You recognize him now, not by his appearance, but by his role. He does not need to be announced. His presence is simply understood. He moves with care, but does not hesitate. This is not uncertainty. It is routine. He samples each dish one at a time, not quickly, not slowly, just enough to fulfill the purpose. His expression remains steady, almost neutral, as though the act itself has been repeated so many times that it no longer invites reaction. Around him, others continue to speak, but their attention drifts just slightly. They are watching, not directly, not openly, but in the small pauses between words, in the brief stillness before a hand reaches forward, you can feel it. Everyone is waiting, not for something dramatic, not for a sudden sign, just waiting. Because even though the ritual is familiar, its outcome is never entirely certain. You begin to notice how time stretches in these moments. A few seconds feel longer than they should. A breath seems to linger just slightly before it is released. And then, quietly, the tension softens. Nothing happened. The taster steps back. The dishes remain as they are. The conversation resumes its gentle rhythm, as if nothing had interrupted it. But you know that something has taken place. A transfer. Risk has moved, just for a moment, from those who will eat to the one who tasted first. You glanced at him again. He has already stepped away, returning to the edge of the space. His role, for now, is complete. And yet, even in completion, it does not feel finished, because the safety he provides is not absolute. It cannot be. You begin to understand that this ritual is not designed to eliminate danger. It is designed to reduce it, just enough to allow life to continue. Each bite that follows carries a quiet calculation, not spoken, not measured in numbers, but felt. If nothing has happened yet, perhaps nothing will. If the taster is unharmed, perhaps the food is safe. But there is always a small space left open, a space where uncertainty remains. The young servant moves through the room, refilling cups, adjusting small details that keep the scene flowing smoothly. His movements are careful, almost invisible, designed not to interrupt. At one point, he paused near the taster. Their eyes meet briefly. No words are exchanged, but something passes between them, a shared understanding. The servant knows what the taster has done. The taster knows what the servant has seen, and both of them continue, as if nothing needs to be acknowledged. You begin to feel the weight of that quiet exchange, because it reveals something deeper about how this world functions. Protection is not a fixed state. It is a process, one that depends on people taking on risk, often without recognition, so that others may feel just slightly more secure. And even then, only slightly. You notice how the people at the table eat with expressions composed. They don't rush. They do not hesitate. Their movements are steady, controlled, as though they have learned how to balance awareness with normality. This is how life continues, not by removing danger entirely, but by learning how to move alongside it. A quiet rhythm. Taste, pause, continue. Conversation flows in gentle patterns. If touching on familiar topics, avoiding anything that might disturb the balance that has been carefully maintained. It is almost peaceful, and yet, that peace is not simple. It is built, maintained through attention, through habit, through the quiet cooperation of everyone involved. You take in the scene once more, and it feels layered, calm on the surface, but held together by something more deliberate beneath. The meal comes to an end, plates cleared gradually, voices softening as people begin to rise. The ritual dissolves back into the flow of the day. And still, something lingers, a realization that settles gently but firmly. Safety here is never complete. It belongs for a moment to one person, then another, and then slips away again, becoming something shared, uncertain, always in motion. You begin to understand that this is not simply about food. It is about how risk moves through a system, how it is managed, shifted, absorbed, and how, in the end, it never fully disappears. As the room empties and the quiet, not heavy, not urgent, just quietly present. That in a world like this, even the act of eating is not entirely your own. The room has emptied, and the echoes of conversation fade into something softer, almost like a memory settling into place. You carry with you the quiet understanding that even the most ordinary acts are shaped by careful thought. Eating, speaking, observing, all of it gently adjusted to meet a world where certainty is never fully given. And now, as that awareness deepens, another realization begins to unfold. If safety depends on people, then it is only as steady as those people remain. You begin to notice this in small, almost unremarkable moments. A servant hesitates just briefly before completing a task. A guard shifts his weight, his attention drifting for the smallest fraction of time. Nothing significant, nothing that draws concern. And yet, each of these moments introduces something subtle, variation, because no system, no matter how carefully arranged, can remain perfectly still. It depends on human hands, human choices, human attention, all of which can change. You find yourself standing near a quiet corridor where movement is slower and voices are even more restrained. The air feels still, as though it is holding something unspoken. A pair of figures stands at a distance, engaged in conversation. One is dressed with quiet authority, the other more simply. Their exchange is brief, but you notice the way it unfolds. The simpler figure listens more than he speaks. When he does respond, his words are measured, careful. But there is something else there too, something that does not quite settle into place. A slight delay, a faint shift in tone. It is nothing that could be named directly, and yet it lingers. You begin to understand that trust in a world like this is never absolute. It is extended carefully, often out of necessity rather than certainty. Because systems of protection, the guards, the servants, the messengers, are built from individuals. And individuals carry their own thoughts, their own pressures, their own unseen influences. A guard walks past you, his step steady, his expression composed. He appears reliable, practiced in his role. And yet, you find yourself wondering, what does he carry with him that cannot be seen? A private concern, a quiet resentment, a moment of doubt. Any of these on their own might mean nothing. But within a system that depends on consistency, even the smallest shift can matter. The young servant appears again, moving through the corridor with a quiet familiarization. He pauses near a doorway, listening, not intentionally, but as part of the natural awareness he has developed. Inside, voices murmur softly. You cannot hear the words, but you can feel the tone. It is not entirely at ease. The servant does not linger. He continues on, his expression unchanged. And yet, something in that brief moment feels important, because it reflects a deeper truth. The closer someone stands to power, the more influence they quietly hold. Not always in obvious ways, not through direct action, but through access, through the perimeter, through the simple fact of being present in space where others are not. You begin to see how this creates a delicate balance. Those who are trusted must be close, but closeness creates opportunities. An opportunity in a world shaped by quiet ambition and hidden risk is never entirely neutral. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles gently. Protection is not a fixed barrier. It is a living structure, one that shifts with the people who maintain it. You imagine how this might unfold over time, not as a single dramatic failure, but as a series of small changes. A message delivered slightly differently than intended, a detail omitted, a moment of inattention at just the wrong time. Each one, on its own, is insignificant, but together, they create space. And in that space, something unexpected can take shape. You recall the quiet rituals you have observed, the food tasting, the careful speech, the measured movements, all of them designed to manage risk, to reduce uncertainty. And yet, none of them can fully account for this. The human element, the part that cannot be predicted, cannot be fully controlled. The corridor remains still, the light soft against the stone walls. Everything appears as it should be, and yet, you feel it now, more clearly than before. A subtle fragility, not a problem exactly, but a quiet understanding that even the most carefully maintained system carries within it the possibility of change, because it is alive, and everything that lives can shift. The servant passes by once more, this time without pausing. His steps are steady, his path familiar. And yet, you notice how easily he moves between spaces, from one room to another, from one conversation to the next. He is part of the structure, and at the same time, he moves through it freely. It is a gentle reminder that those who seem least powerful often carry the most unnoticed access, not by intention, but by position. You begin to understand that danger does not always come from outside. It can emerge from within the very systems designed to prevent it. Not because those systems are flawed, but because they are human. And as that thought settles, it brings with it a quiet, almost inevitable conclusion. The closer someone stands to you, the more they shape what happens next. The corridor fades behind you, and with it, the subtle awareness that even protection can shift. What remains is something softer, but more persistent. Not a single moment, not a single event, but a feeling that stretches across everything you have seen. Uncertainty. It does not arrive quickly. It does not demand your attention. Instead, it settles slowly, like a thin layer of dust that gathers without being noticed, until one day you realize it has been there all along. You begin to feel how this uncertainty shapes the rhythm of life, not in ways that disrupt it, but in ways that quietly guide it. A conversation begins, and even as words are spoken, there is an awareness of what cannot be confirmed. A decision is made, but it carries with it a small, unspoken question. Is this right? Is this safe? Is there something unseen, just beyond what can be understood? No one asks these questions aloud. They don't need to, because they are already present, woven into the way people think, the way they move, the way they choose what to say and what to leave unsaid. You find yourself standing in an open space once more, where the light has softened into the gentle tones of late afternoon. Shadows stretch longer now, not sharply, but gradually, blending into another in quiet layers. It feels like a reflection of what you are beginning to understand. Nothing here is entirely clear. Nothing is entirely hidden. Everything exists somewhere in between. You notice a group of people gathered nearby, engaged in what appears to be a simple discussion. Their voices are calm, their gestures relaxed, and yet there is a subtle rhythm beneath it, a pattern of pauses, of glances, all of moments where something almost emerges and then recedes. It is not a problem, it is patience, because to move too quickly from suspicion to certainty would be dangerous. You begin to understand that in a world like this, proof is rare, not because nothing happens, but because what happens is often difficult to trace. A person falls ill, another withdraws from public view, a decision is made, and its consequences unfold quietly over time. Each of these could have many explanations, and so people learn to live without fully resolving them. They carry possibilities instead of conclusions. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles gently. This is not a temporary state. It is a way of being, a constant low-level awareness that something may be happening, even if it cannot be clearly seen. It doesn't overwhelm you, it does not paralyze. Instead, it becomes part of the background, like a distant sound that you no longer consciously hear, but that shapes the silence around it. The young servant appears again, standing near the edge of the space. His posture is relaxed, his expression is calm. From a distance, he seems at ease, almost detached from the weight of everything you have been considering. But as you watch him more closely, you notice something familiar. The way his attention moves, not quickly, not anxiously, but steady. He listens, even when he is not part of the conversation. He observes, even when there is nothing obvious to see. And in that quiet awareness, you recognize the same pattern that has been unfolding all along. He doesn't know everything. He cannot. And yet, he understands enough to move carefully, to adjust, to remain aware without needing certainty. At one point, a voice calls out from across the space. The servant turns, expanding it with a small nod before moving in that direction. His steps are measured, unhurried. Nothing about the moment feels tense, and yet, beneath it, the same quiet question remains. What is known, and what is only suspected? You begin to feel how this question shapes not only individual actions, but the entire atmosphere of the world around you. It creates a kind of balance, not a stable one, not something that can be fully relied upon, but something that allows life to continue. Because if every suspicion demands resolution, nothing will move forward. And if every uncertainty were ignored, danger would grow unchecked. So people exist between these two states, not fully knowing, not completely ignored, i.e. just holding the possibility. The light shifts again, softening further as the day begins its quiet descent toward evening. The air feels cooler now, carrying with it a sense of stillness that is not empty, but full of quiet presence. It reminds you of the feeling that has been building all along, not sharp, not overwhelming, but steady. Like watching distant stars, small points of light that seem fixed. And yet, if you watch long enough, you begin to feel that they are moving slowly, almost imperceptibly. You cannot track their motion clearly. You cannot say exactly how they changed. And yet, you know that they do. In the same way, uncertainty here is not something that can be fully grasped. It shifts, it evolves, it remains just beyond complete understanding, and still, it is real. You begin to understand that this is what it means to live within a system shaped by quiet intrigue, not to reveal every truth, not to resolve every question, but to move forward with an awareness that something may always lie beneath the surface. And as that understanding settles, it brings with it a final, gentle realization. Over time, uncertainty does not feel like something separate from life. It becomes part of how you breathe, The quiet weight of uncertainty stays with you, even as the world around you begins to change. At first, the shift is almost unnoticeable. The stone beneath your feet feels different, somehow softer, worn not by sandals, but by heaviest steps. The air carries a new scent, faintly of damp earth and distant smoke. You are no longer in Rome, and yet the feeling is familiar. It may be because uncertainty has followed you here. Only now, it begins to take a different shape. The space around you opens into a small village, where low-roofed houses lean gently into another, as if sharing warmth. The ground is uneven, softened by recent rain, and each step presses lightly into the soil. Above you, the sky stretches wide, pale and shifting. There is no marble, no grand structure holding the horizon in place. Instead, everything feels closer to the natural world, less controlled, more exposed. And within that openness, something subtle begins to change. In Rome, danger moved through people, through conversations, through silence, through the quiet removal of those who stood too close to power. Here, danger feels less visible, less defined. You begin to notice it in the way people move, not cautious in the same measured way as before, but attentive to something beyond each other. A woman pauses at the edge of a doorway, her gaze lifting briefly toward the sky before she steps inside. A man adjusts his hat, glancing at the horizon as though searching for something that has not yet arrived. Their attention is not only on the world around them, but on what might lie beyond it. A low sound reaches you, steady, resonant, carrying through the air with a quiet authority. A bell. It rings slowly, each note lingering just long enough to be felt before the next begins. The sound does not rush. It spreads, touching the edges of the village, settling into the space between movement and thought. You notice how people respond, not with alarm, not with urgency, but with appreciation. Heads incline slightly, conversations soften. Oh, a few hands pause in their work, just for a moment. It is not simply a signal, it is a reminder that there are forces here that do not need to be seen to be understood. You begin to feel that belief in this place is not separate from everyday life. It is woven into it, not as something distant or abstract, but as a way of making sense of what cannot be explained directly. You walk slowly along the narrow path, observing the quiet rhythm of the village. A group of children plays near a fence, their laughter light, but even they pause occasionally, glancing toward the adults as if taking cues from something they do not fully understand. A farmer stands nearby, his hands resting against a wooden tool. He is still, watching the sky with a calm that is not entirely relaxed. There is no immediate danger, nothing that demands action. And yet, he watches, as though the sky itself might carry meaning. You begin to understand that here, uncertainty does not remain empty for long. It is filled with interpretation, with belief, with the quiet sense that the world is not random, but expressive. Those events, even small ones, may carry messages. A shift in the wind, a sudden silence among birds, a dream reminded just after waking up. None of these are ignored. They are noticed, considered, felt. The young servant you have followed in Rome is no longer here, but in his place another figure begins to take shape. A woman standing just outside her home, holding a small bundle of herbs. She moves slowly, deliberately, her hands practiced in their work. She arranged the herbs with care, tying them together before placing them near the doorway. It is not decoration. It is intentional. You watch as she steps back, her gaze lingering on the bundle for just a moment. There is no visible tension in her posture, no sign of fear, only quiet reassurance. As though this small act offers a form of protection, not against something clearly defined, but against something that might be present, just beyond sight. You begin to see how this world differs from the one you have left behind. In Rome, danger was shaped by people, by ambition, by power, by choices made in quiet rooms. Here, danger feels more diffuse, less tied to individuals, more connected to the unseen. It does not always have a face. It does not always have a clear cause. And so, people respond differently. Not by watching each other alone, but by watching everything. The wind, the sky, the behavior of animals. Each detail becomes part of a larger pattern, one that must be interpreted carefully. The bell rings again, softer now, its sound stretching into the distance. You feel it settle into the space around you, not as a command, but as a presence, a quiet reminder that this world is held together not only by what can be touched and seen, but by what is believed. You take a slow breath, and the realization unfolds gently. When danger cannot be clearly located, it begins to spread, not in form, but in feeling, and belief becomes the way people contain it, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to continue. As the light begins to soften and the village settles into a quieter rhythm, you find yourself holding on to a single thought, not sharp, not urgent, but quietly unfolding. Here, danger does not always have a face. Maestro. You remain within the soft rhythm of the village, where sound travels gently and movement never feels rushed. The bell's echo has faded now, but something of it remains, not in the air, but in the way people continue to move, as though guided by a rhythm that is no longer heard, but still felt. And slowly, you begin to notice something new. People here do not just observe one another. They observe everything, not casually, not without purpose, but with a quiet attentiveness that feels almost instinctive. You follow a narrow path that leads toward the edge of the village, where the land opens into fields stretching outward in soft, uneven lines. The earth is dark and slightly damp beneath your feet, holding the memory of recent rain. A farmer stands there, just at the boundary between cultivated ground and open sky. His posture is relaxed, but not idle. His hands rest loosely at his sides, and his gaze is fixed not on the soil, but on the distance beyond it. At first, there is nothing unusual to see. The sky is pale, touched with thin clouds that drift slowly. The wind moves slightly across the field, bending the tops of growing plants in a gentle rhythmic motion. And yet, something feels different. Not wrong, not alarming, just quieter than it should be. You notice it gradually. The absence of small sounds. The birds that had been moving across the sky are no longer visible. The faint hum of insects has softened, almost to silence. The farmer shifts his weight slightly, his eyes narrowing just a little as he continues to watch. He does not act, but he notices, and that noting carries meaning. You begin to understand that in this world, silence is not always empty. Sometimes it is a sign, a pause before something changes. You stand beside him for a moment, sharing the stillness. It is not uncomfortable, it is not tense, but it is attentive, as though both of you are listening, not for a sound, but for a shift. A breeze moves across the field again, slightly cooler this time. It carries with it a faint scent, damp soil, distant water, something that suggests change without confirming it. The farmer exhales slowly, almost imperceptibly. He turns away, not in alarm, but in quiet acknowledgement. His movements are steady as he begins to gather his tools, preparing for something that has not yet arrived, but is already understood. You follow his gaze once more, and now the sky feels different. It's still calm, still pale, but no longer neutral. You begin to see how meaning is drawn not from a single moment, but from patterns, from small changes that, when noticed together, suggest something larger, a silence that lasts a little too long, a wind that shifts direction, a feeling that something is about to happen. None of these are certain, and yet none of them are ignored. You walk back toward the village, and the same attentiveness appears again, in different forms. A woman pauses as she steps outside, her eyes scanning the sky before she continues. A child looks up suddenly, as if responding to something that no one else has named. Even animals seem to be part of this quiet conversation. A dog lifts its head, ears alert, then settles again, without making a sound. Everything feels connected. Not in a way that can be explained clearly, but in a way that is felt. You begin to understand that, for the people here, the world is not silent. It speaks, not with words, but with signs. And those signs are not always easy to read. They require attention, patience. A willingness to accept that meaning may not be immediate. You recall the uncertainty you felt in Rome, the sense that something might be happening beneath the surface, hidden within human actions and intentions. Here, that same uncertainty exists, but it has expanded. It is no longer limited to people. It includes everything: the sky, the land, the smallest shift in sound or movement. And slowly, you begin to feel something that does to the mind. It does not create panic. It creates awareness, a constant gentle listening, not for certainty, but for possibility. Though the woman with the herbs appears again, standing near her doorway. She looks up briefly, her expression thoughtful, then adjusts the small bundle she placed earlier. Her movements are calm, almost habitual, but they are not empty. They are part of a pattern, a response to a world that feels alive with quiet signals. You begin to realize that this way of seeing does something important. It fills the space that uncertainty leaves behind, not with fixed answers, but with meaning. Because when the world feels unpredictable, it becomes easier to believe that it is also intentional, that what happens is not random, but part of something larger, something that can be understood, if only you listen closely enough. The light begins to dim slightly, the edges of the day softening as the sun lowers. Shadows stretch across the ground, blending into one another until they become less distinct. It feels like the world itself is becoming quieter, more inward. And in that quiet, you feel the weight of this way of living. Not heavy, not overwhelming, but constant. A gentle effort to notice, to interpret, to remain connected to a world that never fully explains itself. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles softly. When everything seems to carry meaning, you begin to listen, not just to people, but to everything. The softness of the fading day lingers, and with it, the quiet habit of listening, not just to voices, but to the world itself. You have begun to notice patterns, to sense how silence, movement, and change are rarely dismissed as meaningless. And now, that way of seeing begins to turn inward, towards people once more. Because when a world feels full of signs, it does not take long for those signs to gather around someone. You walk slowly along the narrow path, where the ground has dried slightly, though it still holds the faint imprint of earlier rain. The village feels calmer now. The energy of the day settles into something more contained. A small group stands near a well, their voices low, their posture relaxed. At first, their conversation felt ordinary, shared concerns, small observations. But then something shifts, not in volume, in focus. A name is mentioned. It is spoken softly, almost carefully, as though it carries more weight than the others. You do not hear it clearly, but you feel the effect it has. The rhythm of the conversation changes. There is a pause, a glance exchanged between the two of them, a subtle tightening in the space between words. Something is being considered. You remain still, listening not to the words themselves, but to the tone that surrounds them. Because tone here often reveals more than speech. One of them spoke again, this time more firmly, though still quiet. A follows gesture, small but deliberate, pointing not directly, but in the direction of a distant house at the edge of the village. The others do not react immediately, but they do not dismiss it either, and in that hesitation, something begins to form. You understand now that when misfortune appears, when something goes wrong without a clear cause, it does not remain unexplained for long. A crop fails unexpectedly. A child falls ill without warning. An animal behaves in a way that cannot be easily understood. Yet each of these moments creates a question, and in a world where questions rarely remain empty, answers begin to take shape, not always through evidence, but through association, through memory, through difference. You notice how the conversation continues, slowly, carefully. The name is spoken again, this time with less hesitation. It begins to settle, not as a fact, but as a possibility that feels right enough. You follow the direction of their earlier gesture. Your gaze moves toward the edge of the village. There, a small house stands slightly apart from the others. Its walls are worn, its position just distant enough to feel separate. Nothing about it is alarming, and yet, now that your attention has been drawn to it, it feels marked, not by anything visible, but by the weight of being noticed. You begin to understand how easily this happens, how a person, simply by standing slightly outside the usual patterns, can become a place where uncertainty gathers. A woman who lives alone, someone whose habits are unfamiliar, someone who knows things others do not fully understand. Herbs, remedies, small rituals passed quietly from one generation to another. None of these are dangerous on their own. And yet, in the presence of fear, they can become something else. The woman you saw earlier appears again in your thoughts, the one with the herbs by her doorway. Her movements had been calm, deliberate, even comforting in their quiet rhythm. But now, you begin to see how that same behavior could be interpreted differently. Not as protection, but as an influence. Not as care, but as control. You feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere around you. It is not afraid in its sharpest form. It is something quieter, a need to understand, a need to explain what cannot be clearly seen. And when that need grows strong enough, it begins to search for a place to rest, a person, a name, a story that feels complete, even if it is not certain. You return your attention to the group near the well. Their conversation has softened again, the intensity fading just slightly. No decision has been made, no accusation spoken directly. And yet, something has changed. The possibility now exists. And once a possibility takes shape, it does not easily disappear. It lingers. It returns in quiet moments. It grows stronger with repetition. You notice how one of them glances, almost unconsciously, toward the distant house again. It is a small movement, easily overlooked, but it carries meaning. Because attention, once directed, rarely remains neutral. The farmer you saw earlier passes nearby, carrying his tools back toward his home. His expression is unchanged, his movement steady. But as he walks, his gaze shifts briefly toward that same distant house. Just for a moment. Then it returns forward, as if nothing has happened. You begin to feel the quiet weight of this pattern, not dramatic, not immediate, but persistent. Because fear does not always arrive as a sudden force. Sometimes it builds slowly, through suggestions, through repetition, through the simple act of connecting one uncertain event to another. And in that process, something subtle but powerful takes place. Difference becomes meaning. Meaning becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes something that feels almost like truth. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles gently. In a world filled with signs, with uncertainty, with quiet attempts to understand what cannot be fully explained, sometimes fear simply needs a name. The name has been spoken softly, almost carefully, and now it lingers. Not loudly, not insistently, but in the way a thought returns when the mind is still. You continue along the path. The village settles deeper into the evening. The air cools gently, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and damp soil. Doors close one by one, not suddenly, but with a quiet finality that signals the end of the day's outward movement. And yet, something remains open. Not the doors, not the voices, but the feeling you have begun to understand, that delicate balance between knowing and not knowing. Hulk between fear and reassurance. You notice it first in the way people prepare for the night. A woman places a small object near her window, something simple, almost unremarkable, a carved piece of wood, worn smoothly by time. She adjusts it slightly, as if its position matters, then steps back with a faint sense of completion. Not exactly relief, but something close to it. Nearby, another figure murmurs a short prayer, the words too soft to distinguish, but familiar in their rhythm. The tone is steady, practiced, neither urgent nor uncertain. These are not dramatic acts. They are quiet, repeated, woven into the routine of daily life so completely that they no longer draw attention to themselves. And yet, they carry meaning, because they exist in response to something that cannot be fully seen. You pause, observing the scene as it unfolds gently around you. There is no panic here, no visible fear that disrupts the calm of the evening, but there is awareness, and with it, preparation. You begin to understand that the same beliefs that create unease also provide comfort. The herbs by the doorway, the object by the window, the quiet prayer spoken before rest. Each of these acknowledges the possibility of danger, but at the same time, each offers a way to respond to it, not with certainty, but with action. And in that action, something shifts. Fear becomes manageable, not removed, not resolved, but contained within a pattern that allows life to continue without interruption. You think again of the woman with the herbs. Earlier, her presence had begun to feel uncertain, shaped by the quiet conversation you overheard. And a possibility had formed around her, one that carried the weight of suspicion. And yet, here you see something different. A child approaches her doorway, holding something small in his hands. He hesitates, then steps closer. The woman turns, her expression calm, her movements gentle as she knees slightly to meet him at eye level. You cannot hear what is being said, but you see the exchange. The child offers the object. The woman examines it, then responds with a few quiet words. She reaches for a small bundle of herbs, separating a few leaves and placing them carefully into the child's hand. The child nods, his posture eases, before turning back toward his home. The woman watches him go, then returns to her doorway, her expression unchanged. It is a simple moment, but it carries a quiet contradiction. Because the same person who may be feared, it is also trusted, relied upon, sought out in moments of uncertainty. You begin to feel how these two ideas exist together, not in conflict, but in balance. Fear does not erase trust. Trust does not remove fear. Instead, they move alongside each other, shaping the way people interact, the way they interpret, the way they choose when to approach and when to step back. You walk slowly past the houses, noticing how each one reflects this same pattern in small, personal ways. A symbol etched into wood, a string tied carefully around a handle, a quiet gesture repeated before stepping inside. None of these are identical, and yet all of them serve a similar purpose. They create a sense of control in a world where control is never complete. The sky deepens into a darker shade, the last traces of light softening into something almost imperceptible. Shadows gather, not suddenly but gradually, blending into the spaces between structures and paths. The village grows quieter, but it's not empty. Because even in stillness, the same awareness remains. You begin to understand that belief, in this world, is not simply about fear of what might happen. It is also about the need to feel protected, even if that protection is not absolute, even if it exists only in the act itself, the placing of an object, the speaking of a word, the tying of a small bundle. These actions do not guarantee safety, but they create a feeling of response, and that feeling matters, because without it, uncertainty would remain open, unresolved, difficult to carry. You take a slow breath, feeling the quiet settles around you, and with it, a gentle realization begins to form. What frightens people does not always stand apart from what comforts them. Sometimes it is the same thing, seen from a different moment, a different need, a different way of understanding. The woman at the doorway glanced once more at the herbs she has placed. Her hand lingers there for just a moment, adjusting them slightly before she turns and steps inside. The door closes softly, and the night continues to settle. You remain still for a moment longer, holding on to the quiet balance you have just testified. Not resolved, not simplified, but steady. Because in this world, what frightens you may also be the very thing that helps you feel at ease. Night arrives gently, not as a sudden change, but as a slow unfolding. The last traces of light fade into a soft gray, then into something deeper, until the shapes of the village become less defined, softened at the edges. You remain where you are, allowing your eyes to adjust. At first, the darkness feels like a veil, something that hides, that removes detail. But gradually, as your vision settles, you begin to notice that it does something else as well. It invites attention inward. The sounds of the day have quieted, no more distant voices, no steady rhythm of following along the path. What remains is softer, more spaced, a faint rustle of wind against wood, the subtle creak of a structure settling, the occasional movement of something unseen, small and distant. Each sound stands on its own now, no longer blending into a continuous flow. And in that separation, it feels louder. Not because it has grown in volume, but because there is space around it. You take a slow breath, and even that feels more noticeable. The gentle rise and fall, the quiet passage of air, something that, during the day, would have gone entirely unnoticed. Now, it becomes part of your awareness. You begin to understand that night does not create new thoughts. It reveals the ones that were already there. During the day, your attention had been guided outward, toward movement, toward conversation, toward the many small details that fill the hours. But now, with those distractions softened, the mind has room to move differently, more freely, more inward. You walk slowly along the path, your steps quieter now, absorbed by the softened ground. The village feels still, but not empty. There is a presence here, not visible, not defined, but sensed. Right, you pass by a house where a faint light flickers through a narrow opening. Inside, someone is still awake. The glow shifts gently, suggesting movement. A hand adjusting something, a figure turning slightly. You do not stop, but the image lingers. Because in the quiet of night, even small signs of life feel significant. You notice how your thoughts begin to move differently, not faster, but deeper. A memory returns, not suddenly, but as a soft impression. A moment from earlier, the farmer watching the sky, the woman arranging her herbs, the quiet exchange near the well. Each of these feels closer now, more present, as though the distance between past and present has narrowed. You begin to feel how easily the mind connects things in this space. A sound becomes a signal, a shadow suggests movement, a memory blends with what is happening now, not because anything has changed in the world itself, but because the way you perceive it has shifted. The silence stretches around you, wide and open. It reminds you faintly of fabric, not something tight or fixed, but something gently extended, creating space where there was none before. Within that space, every thought has room to expand. Every small uncertainty has room to grow just slightly larger. You pass beneath a tree, its branches forming dark shapes against the sky. For a moment, they appear to move differently, their outlines shifting as the wind passes through them. You pause, not out of fear, but out of awareness. Because in this light, or lack of it, the boundary between what is real and what is imagined becomes softer, more flexible. You watch for a moment longer, then continue on, your steps steady. You begin to understand why night holds such power in a world shaped by belief and uncertainty. It is not that the world becomes more dangerous. It is that the mind becomes more open to possibility. And possibility, when leaving without clear boundaries, can take many forms. The woman with the herbs appears once more, though only as a faint silhouette now, visible through the small light within her home. She moves slowly, completing the final tasks of her day. At one point, she pauses, her hand rests slightly against the table. Her head tilts slightly as if listening. You wonder what she hears. A sound from outside, a memory returning, or simply the quiet of the night itself. After a moment, she resumes her movements, calm and unhurried. There is no visible fear, only awareness. And that awareness feels familiar now, because it is the same presence you have been carrying, the same gentle attentiveness that has followed you from one place to another, from day into night. You take another slow breath, feeling the stillness settles more deeply. And with it, a quiet realization begins to form. In the darkness, it is not only the world that becomes harder to see. Your thoughts become clearer, not because they are more accurate, but because there is nothing left to distract from them. They move more freely, they linger longer, they connect in ways they wouldn't during the day. And slowly, even the smallest thought begins to feel louder. The night remains still around you, holding its quiet shape. The sounds have thinned, leaving behind only the softest traces, a distant shift of wind, and the faint settling of wood, the quiet rhythm of your own breath. Nothing has changed, and yet, something has. Because now, your attention moves differently. It no longer rests only on what is present. It begins to reach. You take a slow step forward, and as you do, a small sound follows. The faint press of your foot against the ground. It is nothing unusual, nothing worth noticing during the day. But now, it lingers, and without meaning to, you connect it to something else. The same sound you heard earlier, near the tree, the same sadness that followed. It is a simple connection, but it stays with you. You continue walking, and the world seems to offer small pieces of itself, one at a time. A branch shifts slightly overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a soft tapping sound repeats, irregular but persistent. Each detail feels separate, and yet your mind begins to gather them, not quickly, not forcefully, just gently, as though they belong together. You begin to understand how this happens. When the world is uncertain, when clear explanations are rare, the mind does not remain empty. It fills the space with connections, with meaning, with the quiet sense that what happens is not random, but part of something that can be understood, if only the pieces are arranged in the right way. You pause for a moment, standing beneath the open sky. The stars above are faint, scattered slightly across the darkness. They do not form clear shapes at first, but if you look long enough, you begin to trace lines between them, not because those lines exist, but because they feel natural. This star connects to that one. That shape resembles something familiar, and slowly, the sky becomes something more than scattered points of light. It becomes a pattern. You lower your gaze, and the same process continues. The farmers pause before the storm, the silence of the birds, the woman's careful placement of herbs, the whisper name near the well. Each of these on its own is incomplete, but together, they begin to feel connected. You do not force the connection. It forms quietly, almost on its own, because the mind seeks coherence, not sure, just a sense that things belong together in a way that can be followed, even if not fully proven. The woman appears again in the faint light of her home. She moves slowly, her actions familiar, repeat with the ease of habit. And now, as you watch her, your perception has shifted. You do not just see what she is doing, you begin to interpret it. The herbs, not just plants, all but protection. The careful placement, not just routine, but intention. The quiet presence, not just solitude, but something more difficult to define. None of these thoughts arrive suddenly. They settle softly, like layers, and once they are there, they are difficult to separate. You begin to notice how easily one idea leads to another. If the herbs protect, then what are they protecting against? If something needs protection, then something must be present. If something is present, then someone may understand it better than others. The path unfolds naturally. Each step feels reasonable, even if the beginning was uncertain. You take a slow breath, and the realization comes gently. This is how meaning grows, not from certainty, but from the connection, from the quiet linking of one detail to the next, until they begin to form something that feels complete. The night remains calm, unchanged by your thoughts, but your experience of it has shifted. Where before there were separate moments, now there is continuity, a thread that runs through everything, subtle but persistent. You hear the faint tapping sound again, somewhere beyond the edge of the village. This time, it does not feel isolated. It feels like part of something, not something you can define, but something that belongs. The young child you saw earlier moves briefly across the edge of your awareness, stepping quietly from one doorway to another. His movements are small, almost hidden within the shadows. And even this becomes part of the pattern, not because it has to be, but because your mind allows it to be. You begin to understand that this way of seeing is not forced, and it is natural, a response to a world where answers are rarely complete, where uncertainty invites interpretation, where meaning is built slowly from the inside outward. You stand still once more, letting the quiet settle around you, and within that quiet, you feel the pattern continues to form, not rigid, not fixed, but present. A gentle structure that connects what you have seen, what you have heard, what you have felt, and slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to connect things that may, or may not, truly belong together. The night does not change, and yet your experience within it continues to deepen. The same soft darkness surrounds you, the same gentle spacing of sound, the same slow rhythm of breath and thought, but now, something feels more settled, not certain, but arranged. The connections you began to notice, small, quiet, almost tentative, have begun to form a shape, not a fixed one, not something clearly defined, but something that feels coherent. You walk slowly along the path, and each step seems to follow that quiet structure. The sounds you hear no longer feel separate. The movements you notice no longer feel isolated. They belong, not because they must, but because they fit. You begin to understand that this is not confusion. It is a kind of reasoning, not the kind that relies on clear proof or a visible cause, but something more subtle, something that works within the limits of what can be known. When answers are incomplete, the mind does not stop. It continues, slowly, signature, building understanding from what is available. You pause again beneath the open sky, where the faint stars still rest in their quiet positions. Earlier, they were scattered. Then, they began to connect. Now, they hold their shape, even though nothing about them has changed. You can no longer see them as separate points. They have become something more, a pattern that feels stable, a structure that feels real. You begin to feel how powerful that shift is, because once a pattern feels real, it no longer feels like a possibility. It began to feel like truth. You lower your gaze, and the same feeling carries into everything around you. The silence before the storm, the woman with the herbs, the whisper name, the small repeated sounds in the night. Each of these has found its place within the structure you have begun to form, and now they strengthen one another. You no longer need to question each one individually. They support the whole. You take a slow breath, and the realization comes quietly. This is how people understand the unseen, not by ignoring it, not by inventing it suddenly, but by working with what they have, connecting details, holding on to what feels consistent, allowing meaning to grow gradually until it becomes something that can be trusted. The woman appears again. Her presence is now familiar within the pattern you have formed. She moves slowly, her actions unchanged, her posture calm. And yet, your perception of her has shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Where once there was only observation, now there is interpretation. Where once there was uncertainty, now there is direction. You begin to understand that this process is not about being correct. It is about being able to continue, to move forward in a world that does not always explain itself clearly. You recall faintly the world you came from before, the quiet nerves of Rome, the careful watching, the awareness of unseen intentions. There, uncertainty lives in people. Here, it lives everywhere. And so, the response has changed from watching others to understand the world itself as something that can be read, interpreted, followed. You walk a little further, and the faint tapping sound returns once more. This time, you do not pause, because it no longer feels uncertain. It seems as expected. Part of the pattern, part of the structure that is quietly formed around you. And that is when you begin to notice something important. The comfort that comes with this understanding, not completely safe, not absolute clarity, but something steady. A sense that the world, and even in its uncertainty, can be followed. That what happens is not entirely without meaning, that there is a way to move through it without feeling lost. You begin to see that what might appear from the outside as unfounded belief is, from the inside, something much more grounded, a response to uncertainty, a way of creating continuity where none is clearly given, a form of quiet logic, not rigid, not perfect, but human. The child moves again at the edge of your awareness, his small steps soft against the ground. He pauses briefly, looking toward the same distant space you have been watching, then continues without hesitation. He does not ask a question. He follows what feels natural, and in that, you see how deeply this way of understanding can settle into everyday life. It does not remain an idea. It becomes a way of seeing, though a way of moving, a way of being. You take another slow breath, letting the quiet surround you once more, and with it, a final thou not sharp, not expected, but steady. Perhaps. These patterns were never meant to deceive. Perhaps. They were a way of making sense of a world that rarely offered simple answers. And they were not entirely wrong. The night remains still, holding everything gently in place. Nothing shifts suddenly. No new sound breaks the quiet. And yet, something within you begins to settle, as if the many small threads you have been following are slowly drawing together, not into a single answer, but into a feeling that is easier to hold. You stand once more beneath the open sky, where the faint stars remain, unchanged, distant, quietly present. Earlier, they became patterns. Then those patterns began to feel real. And now, you begin to understand why. You think back, slowly, to where this journey began, to the careful movements in Rome, to the quiet rituals around food, to the constant watchfulness, the subtle awareness that danger could exist beneath ordinary moments. There, power moves through people. It shaped what could be said, what could be trusted, what could be known or left uncertain. A word spoken too directly might carry risk. A silence might carry meaning. A simple act, eating, speaking, standing in the wrong place, could hold consequences that were not immediately visible. You realize now that in such a world, uncertainty was not an accident. It was part of how power worked, not always intentionally, but inevitable. Because when information is incomplete, when truth is difficult to confirm, people must find other ways to understand what surrounds them. And so, they watch, they listen, they notice what cannot be openly explained. The memory of Rome fades gently into the background, and the village returns, quiet, grounded, shaped by a different kind of uncertainty. Here, power feels less visible, but it is still present, not only in rulers or decisions, but in belief, in the shared understanding of what is real, what is possible, what must be protected against. You recall the bell, its slow, steady sound moving through the air, not forcing action, but guiding attention. You recall the herbs by the doorway, the quiet gestures repeat without question. You recall the whisper name near the well, how quickly a possibility can take shape when uncertainty seeks direction. And slowly, you begin to see how these two worlds connect. In Rome, people responded to hidden power. In this village, they respond to hidden meanings. But in both, the experience is the same, a need to understand what cannot be fully seen, a need to feel that the world, even in its uncertainty, follows some kind of order. You take a slow breath, and the realization settles softly. What is often called conspiracy is not always about falsehood. It is often about connection, the linking of events that feel related, the search for intention behind what appears uncertain, the quiet belief that there is something beneath the surface, waiting to be understood. This does not mean every connection is correct. It does not mean every pattern reflects reality as it truly is. But it does mean something important. It means that people were not simply imagining things without reason. They were responding to the world as they experienced it, a world where power cannot always be trusted, a world where causes were not always visible, a world where uncertainty was constant and answers were rarely complete. In such a world, to search for meaning is not irrational, it is necessary. You look once more at the quiet shapes around you, the outlines of homes, the soft movement of the night, the faint presence of life continuing behind closed doors. Everything feels calm, and yet, beneath that calm, there is depth, layers of thought, of belief, of quiet interpretation that have shaped how people live, how they understand, how they move through each day. The woman with the herbs rests now. Her home is still and silent. The child has long since disappeared into the quiet safety of sleep. The farmer, the villager, each one carries within them the same gentle pattern you have come to recognize. Not sure, but connection. Not complete understanding, but a way forward. You begin to feel a sense of calm in that realization, because it brings everything back to something simple. Human experience, the need to make sense of what surrounds you, the need to feel that the world is not entirely beyond understanding. The quiet effort to connect what you see, what you hear, what you feel, into something that can be lived with. You take one final slow breath, letting the night settle around you, and with it, a gentle truth remains. What once sounded like rumor, what once seemed like fear or imagination, was often something much quieter, a reflection of how people lived, of how they understood power, of how they carried uncertainty, and turned it into something they could follow. And so, we've reached the end of tonight's wandering. Whether your eyes are still open or already drifting, thank you for keeping me company here among worn paths, dim light, and the quiet ways people have always tried to understand their world. If this brought you a little calm, you're welcome to subscribe or share it with someone who might need a softer night. For now, rest well. You're safe, you're warm, and the past can keep watching.